Thank you. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Board. Today is Wednesday, March 16th. It is now 6 p.m. I'm calling the meeting to order. And could you please give your attention to this short video?
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should mute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice for public comment guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Thank you. And now, Terry Ann, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Arnridge.
Here.
Commissioner Butt.
Here.
Commissioner Geringer.
Here.
Commissioner Haskew.
Here.
Commissioner Hudson.
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Here.
Commissioner Nowak.
Here.
Commissioner Thorpe. Commissioner White.
Here.
Vice Chair Glover.
Here.
Chair Kelly.
Here.
Representative Foley.
Present.
Representative Powers.
Here.
Representative Worth.
She's running a bit late.
Okay, so we have everyone present except for Commissioner Thorpe. Oh, I see Amy, Representative Worth coming in now. And we also have alternates Fidelli and Peoples.
Okay,
Representative Worth.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So our next item is the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Commissioner Arnridge. So could everyone please mute their mic? And Newell?
Yes, if you please join me and place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. If anyone has wishes to speak, please raise your hand and the staff or I will call upon you. Terry Ann, do we have anyone wishing to speak on items that are not on the agenda tonight?
We have no written public comment and I don't see any verbal comments.
Okay, so then we'll move ahead. And we don't have any presentations this evening. So we'll move on to the consent calendar. Does anyone care to pull an item from the consent calendar? No? Does anyone wish to, from the public, have any comments on the consent calendar? If so, please raise your hand. Not seeing anyone. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
To approve.
Okay, motion by Haskew. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Arnridge. Terry Ann, can we have the roll, please?
Commissioner Arnridge.
Yes.
Commissioner Butt.
Yes.
Commissioner Geringer.
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew.
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson.
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak.
Yes.
Commissioner Thorpe, I believe, is still absent. Commissioner White,
Yes.
Vice Chair Glover,
Yes.
Chair Kelly.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Thorpe absent.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So now we come to our regular agenda items, and the first item is just an information item only. Stephanie, who is going to present us with a presentation on the East Contra Costa Dynamic Personal Micro Transit Project. And she'll give us a status update. Stephanie?
Thank you, Commissioner and Chair Kelly. Just good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Hu, Director of Project CCTA. Like Chair said, this is an information item and is an update on DPMT. In December, you all received a presentation on findings of a feasibility study on DPMT. And part of that presentation included recommended next steps, which were to conduct an industry review or outreach and also research on public-private partnership or P3 delivery method. Tonight's presentation will be given by Brent Butson. He is an attorney from Kaplan, Kirsch, and Rockwell, and his expertise is on alternative delivery methods such as P3. Brent also assisted on the industry outreach that we had last month, and he's also been assisting us in crafting or drafting a P3 delivery model for DPMT, and his presentation tonight will be covering these topics. And with that, I will hand it over to Brent, and I will start the presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. You're going to share screen, right?
Yes.
Fantastic. I'll let that come up. Again, happy to be here. Thank you, everybody. Brent Pitzing with Kaplan, Kirsch, and Rockwell. We gave a version of this to the APC committee earlier in the month. And with a few changes since then, we'll do a similar presentation this evening. A quick reminder briefly on what the project is, then I will briefly explain kind of high level what a public-private partnership even is, and then briefly touch on what we're thinking currently for the procurement of the DPMT project, and briefly on what the roles of CCTA and Tri-Delta Transit, who will also be participating in that procurement, will be. If you could go ahead, next slide, please. So briefly on how we got here. This is a slide that we actually gave to the industry as well before we talked about the feasibility study that I'll get to in a minute. Really, it's the background on why this project exists and what the feasibility study was really trying to accomplish. So this is from the prior work that CCTA has done on what the priorities are in East County for transit, improving the user experience, expanding access, supporting economic development. A couple that are really of particular importance for the Dynamic Personal Microtransit project are, well, obviously, enabling innovative. I hope everything's okay.
Yes, could everyone mute their mic if you're not speaking? Thank you.
Hopefully that wasn't a fire alarm. That's what it sounded like. So enabling innovative transit options. We'll talk a little bit about what this project is. There's more in the feasibility study, of course, and in particular, solving first mile, last mile challenges to the transit system using those innovative technologies. So that's really was the background that led to the feasibility study. Go to the next slide, Stephanie. So this is the routing. I'll just leave this up here for a bit. This is the routing plan that was studied as part of the feasibility study that was completed in April of last year, following some initial outreach to CCTA and East County cities. That feasibility study looked at the viability of a DPMT system, the benefits of that system, and in particular, also looking at the costs and benefits, looked at the potential to attract public funding and private financing both. So that's how we get to the P3 public-private partnership conversation this evening. So on the next slide, this is really a fun graphic that I know Tim likes. So, you know, what the DPMT, Dynamic Personal Microtransit Project is. The feasibility study assumed glideways vehicles. That is not necessarily what the procurement will be moving ahead with, although glideways is one of many options that are in the market today. But it really is exactly what you see there on the screen. It's personal, on-demand transit that can come get you to a transit station to either start or finish your trip, an individualized trip to, again, first and last mile to address what we all know is a tough nut to crack in the transit world. So if we go to the next slide. So when we look ahead to the project that will be procured, hopefully, there are a few things that are going to be key project parameters that we're really looking for industry to bring to the table through this P3 model. So as I mentioned, it'll be on demand, short wait times, and individualized service. So one party ride, nonstop, point to point, not a shared service like some other services in the industry that you're familiar with. In terms of the vehicles themselves, they'll be fully automated. So that's also, these are becoming more and more prevalent in the market. So fully autonomous vehicles, greenhouse gas neutral operations, ADA accessible operations, of course, and because there will inevitably be federal funding in this project, they'd have to also comply with Buy America, Made in the USA requirements. So in terms of the operations that are assumed for this project looking ahead, fully traffic separated as well as autonomous, directionally separated tracks, so both directions at the same time. And the goal really is to, thinking about this being financially feasible, to make it operate at grade as much as possible. The more grade separation, the more expensive it gets, the harder for this to break even. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Oh, additional priorities too, in addition to kind of the project parameters for procurement, this really is an opportunity to prove new technology in the market. TIM and CCTA are kind of at the forefront of that. So that is part of what we think is attracting industry to this project and led to really quite good turnout at the industry day as well. So other things, the ability to expand it in the future, of course, safe, of course, sustainability, and also relevant to the feasibility of the P3 model, fare policies that need to operate within the regional fare structures that currently exist. So it's not a total free for all. It needs to be financially viable as a functioning transit system and consistent with other transit systems in East County. So next slide. So on that, again, the feasibility study really was focused on how to attract private funding, private financing and public funding together to make a project. So what is a P3? I could spend forever talking about this. And if anyone has questions, of course, at the end of this, we're happy to take them. But the short answer is there isn't a single definition of a public-private partnership. P3s really exist along a spectrum. So what you think of as a P3, full privatization or monetization of an asset, that's only the very far end of the spectrum. Really, a P3 is anything that takes elements of a project that have traditionally been done by the public sector and has the private sector do those. And that can include many different combinations of design of a project, construction of a project, operations, maintenance, and of course, financing. And the green box on this spectrum from, at the bottom, we've got traditional, purely public things, advisory services where you hire somebody like me to just give you advice, purely a public contract. And on the very other end of the spectrum, you have something that is just a complete private project. The P3s, as we think of them for public transportation infrastructure, and really most infrastructure that is done as a P3 by public entities, live in that green box in a narrower band of combinations of design, build, finance, design, build, operate, maintain. And the traditional P3 does all of those things: design, build, finance, operate, and maintain with private involvement. So that's important when we talk about how we are thinking that this project will be procured and the legal authorities that CCTA and Tri-Delta Transit would be doing this project under, is that it's a bundle of those different things that you do on every project, just in different combinations with more private sector involvement. Next slide. So the delivery model, building on that, I think this is a place where I should pause for a moment and just say that California has not broadly embraced alternative project delivery and P3s. And it's important because while at its core, this is a pretty straightforward project, because in terms of delivery, because you're going to engage with a single developer team, private sector partner to do all of the things I was just describing: design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. But at the same time, neither CCTA nor Tri-Delta Transit have what we would call a broad P3 statute or a broad P3 authorization. What each agency does have are individual authorities to do some of the things I was describing. So you can deliver a design build project, you can operate a transit system, you can do financing. So the delivery model that we've presented to industry and got really good feedback from various players in the market, and we'll touch on that at the end of the presentation. The delivery model that we're proposing is actually a combination of different legal authorities that both CCTA and Tri-Delta Transit have, pursuant to an MOA that I believe you're going to see at next month's meeting between Tri-Delta Transit, who will provide the operations and maintenance legal capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about their role in the procurement, and CCTA, who will be delivering the project, design and construction. Combining those legal authorities along with the Infrastructure Financing Act, which I won't go into in detail, but I think there were materials in your packet with background information on that. Those together to allow all of the parts and pieces of this DPMT project to come together under a single contract. So that's really what this is showing. Next slide. So in terms of the next step for the actual procurement, P3s are frequently different from traditional procurement as well as delivery. This is no different, and this is a little bit different from some other P3 deliveries, even in that we're proposing a two-step process for selecting the development team. The first step, and this would be the procurement that occurs in the near term, would lead to a pre-development agreement for the system. So we're calling it a system pre-development agreement, which is sort of the first phase of the project. And within that first phase, first off, you get the developer team on board to put a lot of sweat equity into the project and help with the project planning and development to figure out what the right approach to this project is, and most importantly, to sharpen pencils, get cost estimates in place, look at potential both fare box revenues and other funding sources that can go into the project, and help figure out what the right first segment of the project is that can pay for itself through a combination of fare box revenues during operations and other public sources, including state and federal grants. And then also within the SPDA phase, once that sort of initial viability is evaluated, if there's a there, if we determine that there is a project that makes sense to move ahead with, that first phase would also get you to that 30% design when you can really start getting firm pricing, and of course do the NEPA and CEQA environmental processes. So that all occurs during the first phase. Then at the end of that SPDA phase, once you have fixed price or can get to a fixed price, once the full funding package is identified and environmental is complete, you would then enter into a subsequent system development agreement that would actually govern design and construction of the project itself. So it's a long process, and we're at the very early stages of the very first stage of that process, but that's what it looks like if you look ahead a couple of years. Next slide. So in terms of the roles of CCTA and Tri-Delta Transit each, because as I mentioned in the structure, both agencies are needed to deliver the project in a way that can be a full DBFOM P3 project. So CCTA will really lead on the procurement side, facilitate the industry outreach, which we've done, and continue to have follow-up meetings with industry players, up until the point that the procurement starts and we formalize that process. That is still ongoing. We are still getting feedback and reach outs from industry participants who want to know what this project's about. So that's promising. CCTA will lead in developing the RFP and lead in selection of the developer team, all the way down to identifying the funding that's required during that first phase, the SPDA phase that I described, and will of course be a counterparty on the agreement that is ultimately entered into with the developer to lend, kind of the design and construction authorities. Next slide. Tri-Delta Transit is really in a supporting role until such time in the future that a project is built. at which time they would then take over operations and maintenance and oversight of the developer who would actually be performing operations and maintenance. But Tri-Delta Transit is participating hand in hand through the whole process. They participated in industry outreach. They will, of course, review and comment on the draft RFP, make sure that we tie it out and get everything right with respect to O&M and the portions of the project that they'll ultimately be responsible for. And Tri-Delta Transit is going to participate in negotiations with the developer through that whole SPDA phase. So next slide. Maybe, are we stuck? Stephanie, there we go. So I mentioned that we had done an industry forum. So gosh, it's been a while now. Way back on February 8th, we hosted an industry forum where we jointly did a presentation to industry that everybody heard kind of the same thing. Not so different from the presentation we're giving today, a little more detail on structure and the things that folks in the P3 industry care about, how this will actually be delivered. And then after the full forum for the whole world, we had targeted one-on-one meetings with various firms who bring innovative technology to the table or are likely to lead a team because they participate in the infrastructure equity world, or they're extremely large engineering construction firms. We met with some of them as well, who also have infrastructure equity wings. So they invest themselves in the projects as well as build them. So we had, I think it's actually 40 plus attendees, and we have had several meetings since then. And the feedback has been interesting. I think there's a lot of work to be done to prove that these new technologies can meet the promise, that they can be financially self-sustaining, and that is, as I said earlier, that there's a there, but the interest, not to be frank, exceeded what my expectations were going in. And so far the conversations have been really quite good. So next slide. So just to wrap this up, I know I'm doing a lot of talking. If there are questions, again, happy to take them. We had the industry day, we've had one-on-one meetings. We're currently on track to execute the MOA between Tri-Delta Transit and CCTA. I believe that's next month. Tim or Stephanie can weigh in if that's not the case. We're also on track to release a first draft of the RFP in the April-May timeframe, using the summer for evaluation and selection of that team, with that first phase agreement, the SPDA that I was referring to, slated for execution sometime in the fall. And then from there, that first phase before we would get to a definitive agreement that would govern design and construction. Given that environmental is also in there, plus a lot of ground truthing and feasibility and analysis, that's probably 2 to 3 years out before shovels are in the ground. But that's kind of what we're looking ahead. With that, I think, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brent. That's great. So questions then from commissioners. Could you raise your hand so I can see you if you have questions or comments? Yes, Newell?
I was looking for my button. I was going to say comments. Thank you.
Okay.
First of all, this is the second presentation we've heard. We saw this APC. And Brent, I think you did a great job. You kind of tweaked it, narrowed it down. This is an exciting opportunity. I think CCTA has been at the forefront of a lot of things. And lots of times we just talk about things and we hope that they happen. This is really real. This is moving forward. And boy, if we could get this going and get this type of transportation, it's first of its kind. And I think that's our agency. That's who we are. We're nimble, we're quick. We have intelligent teams that are involved here. So I just think we're really poised in the right way. This isn't an action item, but I think the more energy and effort we can put in this, this is really going to pay off. And it doesn't make any difference where in the county we do this. It's good for all of us if we can get a demonstration and get this to be successful. So Brent and everybody, really nicely done.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, I think Newell was the one who brought this up at at our previous meeting, and I'm kind of surprised he didn't say anything about it now, but I'm kind of lost in the weeds on this. I'm kind of a simple thinking person, and when I see a project, I kind of look at, okay, what's the project? What's the schedule? What's it going to cost? Where's the money going to come from? And I'm not seeing any of that. I see so many, so many partners and so many moving parts. I don't have a clue how all this comes together. And I'm sure somebody must understand it, but I'm just missing it in the presentation.
Okay. Other questions from commissioners? Or comments? Tim, you got your hand raised. I'll call on you.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. I just wanted to respond to Commissioner Butt's comments. I think this P3 project is it looks complicated because it's a P3 project, and P3 projects can get complicated. But I think, and we talked a little bit about this at APC, and what this really boils down to is really no different than one of our express lane type projects, where we have a designer, we have a contractor, we've got a technology provider, and obviously this technology is way more advanced. We're talking about autonomous vehicles. But the fourth element to this that makes it a P3 is the private equity aspect to it. And so I think the project in itself is, and we did talk about it at a previous board meeting, but the project itself is essentially a dynamic personal microtransit. It's a closed system that's providing system connectivity between BART and park and rides and downtown areas and Amtrak and San Joaquin, et cetera. And so it's really a first and last mile project that is a closed system that really provides that next step in my mind of how to really advance autonomous vehicles from, we're not quite there yet in terms of operating autonomous vehicles in mixed traffic. And so this is really that next step to really giving dedicated space and really moving people in terms of a transportation as a system. And so I think the next step, and I think we're going to be coming back to you again next month and probably the following month with the RFP. And I think when we come with you to the RFP, we'll have definitely some more details, because I would say, quite honestly, that's what the purpose of the whole industry review is to get feedback from industry so we can better shape the project. And so I think it was important to really bring this information to the board, provide you an update of kind of where we're at in current time, and we'll continue to bring information to the board as things evolve. And so when the RFP we'll bring the RFP authorization item to the board in probably April, May timeframe. And I think at that point, we'll have some really clear-cut descriptions about what the specific roles are and who's going to be doing what. But again, I want to emphasize that the project may look complicated, but again, it's a designer, a contractor, a system provider, and someone helping finance the project. And that's ultimately what we're going to be entering into an agreement for through this design, build, finance, operate, maintain contract. So hopefully that addressed your comment, Commissioner Butt.
Thank you. Federal, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that this is a visionary project. And certainly, as we start to move up into the various steps, we better understand what our partnership is going to look like as we grow the vision of what this is. It's not one out there that you can look at and say, oh, it's going to be similar to what's going on here. And I think that that's true for what's happening within the industry as a whole, as we start to vision in terms of how do we work with autonomous vehicles to make them where they can contribute to the whole transit network. So I just look at it as being very futuristic, and I'm glad to see that we are at the forefront of a project like this, because I think that we may be breaking ground that other agencies will be looking at. So no, I agree with you, Tom. I don't see it right now, but I know that that there's some good things in this, and I just look for something that's going to be very good, and in particular for that region where we are so restrained within our ability to build transit.
Thank you, Federal. I think Dave Hudson has a comment or a question.
Yeah, actually, it's along the lines of just saying ditto Federal. Newell and I were back in DC, I don't know how many weeks ago, and he could speak more to what the Secretary of Transportation was saying, but I heard him just 48 hours ago, and it's a repeat of the same thing. It's actually like I wake up at night and I'm worried that we spend over $1 trillion on something and we're not able to show something. And then he let something out that I hadn't heard before. He says, we've got to connect airports to this kind of transit. So when I look at your graph that shows you getting to the first piece, then getting on BART and getting out to the airport, as well as all the other things that he was saying, it starts to make a lot more sense that you're going to do these micro transit type projects. They really want to fund innovation. They want to find something that's different than what was before, because quite simply, if you spend over $1 trillion and get the same thing, you're not going to get a second one. So no, I completely agree. This is, I wish you were doing it in San Ramon, but that, after you guys screw it up over there, we'll take it away from you. But you're on the right track, in my opinion.
Any other commissioners? Well, I have a comment and a question. I kind of agree with Tom. I mean, first of all, I find this very exciting and intriguing, but it's a little bit too much at this point of a vision for me. And at our next presentation, what I'd like to know is in East County, what kind of problem are we trying to solve? Where and how? I understand that the DPMTs, they travel on their own track. So the autonomous vehicles, they can't go across local streets. Are we going to build, like little bridges and pathways over or under certain kinds of intersections? How far might they travel? And what is Tri-Delta's interest in this? I'm sure they can come out and say, hey, this is a problem. We really want to solve it, probably in this area doing this kind of thing. So I think that would help certainly me and some others of us, and perhaps the public, understand kind of where we're going with this. So if y'all, Brent and Stephanie, can, give that some thought, Tim too, that would really, really be helpful.
I think one of the things, excuse me, through the chair,
Yeah.
let me just say, who thought that we would have autonomous vehicles? I mean, George Jefferson, the Jeffersons in that show did some indications early on that who would have thought that we would ever be there, but we're getting closer, right? So.
Yeah, and we saw that when I was a kid on the Jetsons, cartoon show. So
Yeah.
We're getting there. But I just want to know where in our county will this really help and and make a difference to people getting around, particularly in the first mile, last mile. That's really, really important, I think. Newell.
Yeah, I would just add to that, and I agree, and I think Federal said it well, and Chris, I think your questions are absolutely spot on. What it really is that I see is you have to start someplace, and to be honest, to start in a more non-dense urban environment, this is a test facility. It will actually be a model and a test to work out the kinks and stuff. How can we then move it to those other areas? So there are real gaps out there, those first and last miles. So it's easier to do in those environments. There's a higher chance of success. So this was kind of like when we started our autonomous vehicle testing track. We didn't know what it was going to be, but it worked. And we took small steps. So you got to make the first step to get into the arena and into the design area and start vetting out those things. So I think this is probably the reason why we're looking at this location. It does have enough interested parties and the investment community, which is where most of the capital is going to come from, to do this because it's heavy infrastructure. This probably will have the best opportunity for success and to be able to adapt it to those other communities, whether it be in San Ramon. Danville and San Ramon, we don't have any public transportation other than bus. So, eventually we're more than a mile. So eventually this is going to be something that maybe we can get it, that it does 5 miles. Yes, a lot of questions to be answered, but as we take these small steps, the information gets narrower and narrower and clearer. So again, I think we're headed the right way, and I'm glad the agency, we're the agency that's going to do this and take it on.
Yeah, Newell, I would say I'm glad that we're starting in the less populated areas. If you're over by the airport, you can always hop on a shuttle. There's lots of transportation around, but when we get out to the suburban areas where a lot of us live, they're not those options,
Right.
So it's always that last mile. How do we get home?
Yeah.
Or how do we get to a bus or a BART or something like that? So I'm intrigued, but I would like to see kind of what the vision is of where and how we might be doing that.
Also, we might show, because some of us, not everybody has seen it, but Glideways had a simulation of what this
Yeah.
project could look like. I think it might be good to revisit that and put it next time we're going to talk about this. Show with that physical, because I think we're all visually oriented. You can kind of see what it looks like. And I think it'd be pretty cool to visit that again.
Yeah, I agree. I have seen that, but I'd like to see it again and get some more input. Terry Ann, do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this item?
We have no written public comment, and I don't see any hands raised either.
Jim had his hand up.
I don't see anyone else with their hand up. Okay, so no other comments. Well, thank you, Brent and Stephanie, for the presentation. And we look forward to getting the next one and seeing how this project develops. Thank you. So let's move on now. Our next item here is an action item presented by Brent Kelleher on the fiscal year 2021-2022 mid-year budget.
Good evening to all of you. My name is Brian Keller, and I'm going to present the proposed mid-year budget for fiscal year 21-22 that ends in June. Let me just change the view here. Can you all see my screen perfectly now? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. And once again, I'm Brian Kelleher, the Chief Financial Officer, and there's a lot of work that goes into performing the budget analysis for the beginning of the fiscal year and also at mid-year. Just really quick, I added this slide to cover what the finance staff, as well as the projects and programs and the planning teams, we all gather around. I meet individually with all the departments, and it's the continuation of updating and delivery of the CCTA expenditure plan. The biggest component is sales tax, and I'll talk about that frequently as we move through the conversation. And the capital projects and the financial commitments to individual cities and agencies, they're all done through approved resolutions. And so what we do is we work with the TLC and the PED bike programs for your local cities, and we work with your planning departments and public work departments to create a timeline for doing construction projects in your area. Things change at your cities. There could be environmental concerns. And so what we have to do is we go back and we readjust the funding for some of these as we move forward and moving through the budget process on an annual basis. The biggest item is sales tax projection. When we put the budget together for this fiscal year, we started working on it in April and May of last year. That was almost a whole year ago. And coming out of the pandemic, when it started, we were expecting sales tax to plummet 20–25%. And we were surprised last year. We were all the way up to $107.2 million. It was pretty phenomenal from an agency perspective, having all that additional funding. All of that additional funding flows back to your individual cities, whether it's for the bus programs or the local street maintenance programs that we'll cover as we go through the presentation. So right now, when I was working on the presentation about a month and a half ago, I was working with HDL and we came up with some numbers and looking at a lot of the details, and we didn't know what the sales tax results were going to be for the fourth quarter in the calendar year last year. I just got some reports yesterday, and we're up 11.2% on top of the 14% we were up last year. We had a really strong third quarter, which is the July through end of September. And so we're already up to $62 million. And so, as you know, we have a very strong holiday season. There's a lot of travel and different things, and a lot of people are returning back to work during home improvement projects and buying cars instead of using public transportation, and just inflation in general being at a 40-year high. We're seeing sales tax revenue, and now the gas tax is really going up, and we're getting tax money off of that. So our projections of 108 million, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 3-4 months, but if it continues to go the way the last 6 months did, we might be at 110, $112 million. But we need to put in some budget figures in there so that we can work with your financial professionals at your cities so that you guys can budget for your LSM. We're looking at maybe $21 million going to all of the cities in Contra Costa for street maintenance. That's huge compared to where it was a number of years ago. So we're always going to continue to monitor and track economic indicators, and that all plays a role in our financial system as we prepare the budget. But the biggest snapshot of everything that we do, this takes all of Measure J, and you can see that there's a lot of external funding in here. Sales tax revenues, we have a lot of return to source, like I mentioned, to your cities for LSM. We also have projects that are being done in your cities. And there's also money that's set aside. As we work through it, you see other sources, and you see it going from 40 million, 27 million. $27 million is a very large number. And what that is, that's an accumulation of funds that have been built up since Measure J started in 2004, based on projections made by staff. If we were to deliver, as we look down the sheet, $55 million in the project section, that's built up money in years before. So we need other sources to help fund these. We don't fund any project or program unless we come to you. If it's over $10,000, we come to you and get a resolution, a contract. And with capital programs that you've seen in your city, they can take 1 year, they can take 5 or 6 years to finish. And that's what we're doing here. Again, sales tax. Sales tax is great. Your cities are also going to see tremendous growth in property taxes as well. And what we're trying to do is put our best foot forward with what we're going to do with this $108 million that we're getting. And a lot of it is already programmed for each individual city and region within Contra Costa. But we're expecting 108 million, even a little more this year. You can see that we had in 2020, we had the pandemic hit, and we had the stock market and everything come down at the end of June. The $107 million is a lot of growth, and it's also the deferrals of people not paying their taxes in the prior year that kind of came forward into this year. We're going to see a lot of that in this year. The next year, when I bring the budget for next fiscal year in June, it's going to be about $109 million now as our projection. It might be a little bit higher as we move forward as well. Capital projects, is if you listen to some of the projects teams, we're 95% built with all the capital projects, but there's so many different things. We just heard about some more innovation programs here tonight, but there's a lot of external funding. CCTA is changing the way we deliver projects. We have Ivan in the projects division who's working with San Ramon. We're building, we're going to have some external funding there, as you see down on the bottom, contributions from the city of San Ramon for $2.3 million as they phase through the construction. We get some RM2 funding, we get some BATA funding, and there's a lot of federal and state funds that come in to fund these capital projects. We wouldn't be able to deliver these projects if it wasn't for the external funding and the great work that's being done on the Highway 4-680 project, the 680 HOV lanes, the innovation projects in San Ramon area are also a big part of the revenue streams here from the ADS and the MOD projects as well. We also have our regular planning, CMA and PDA funding, and we get federal surface transportation to go out and do studies to see how transportation needs are changing. And we go out and we do studies and we get some reimbursement for that. We get state planning and programming monitoring to pay for staff to deliver these projects and to monitor these things. And then there's the local agency contributions. It's usually budgeted a little higher, and this year it was $275,000. But once we deliver all of the projects and all the revenue that comes in, it usually runs around 150, maybe 175. But we have to budget just like the buses do. We have to budget for what if we deliver all of the projects. Just like if everybody got on the project, we have to have a large bus, but then we only do part of it. So we also get some motor vehicle registration. That's the TFC money. And then that we get about $1.7 million. And that does go back to the individual cities for transportation related items. So as we look at the Measure J capital projects, we have about $45 million budgeted to deliver all of these projects. And again, a lot of these projects are multi-year projects, and there's a lot of individual projects that fall under these 9 individual categories that were established by the expenditure plan in 2004. So we have $45 million in proposed budget. We have some external funding that you can see in the individual columns. And then we have this $20 million MSJ programs. That's getting to be a pinch point for the programs division. The programs division, like I said earlier, has delivered about 90% of their projects, but part of this $20 million is additional revenue that's going to come from future grants, not future grants that we haven't planned for, but it's the timing of the grant revenue that comes in. We don't budget anything with a loss of grants. We keep our grants. We get them all scheduled and filed in time, and it's not a loss. It's just a timing of when these expenditures happen. So as we look down the list, there's not much change in the capital programs this year. The SR4 bypass is where we're budgeting a little less because they delivered a little bit more in last year's fiscal budget because they were able to get more work done. So we had to make a decrease there. The 680 SR4, there's a change there on some delivery. At the I-680, we're making some changes on the innovation program there. Some sub-regional and some minor BART changes on some of the projects that we have there. And so that kind of is an overview of the capital program. As we get into the administrative, there's an administrative section for the authority to go over to cover everything that we do. We have a 1% cap, so 1% of every dollar that we get goes to the administration, and the salaries are allocated among all of the departments that we have. But in the 1% limitation, we're only going to use about 0.6 of a 1% to deliver the programs. And again, what we don't use goes into a future bank of resources as we move closer towards the end of the measure. And if we have to go past the measure date when we stop collecting sales tax, it'll pay for some salaries in the future. And then due to COVID, there was a combination of adjustments that were made to services and supplies. We're also converting some of our rooms so we can do some hybrid Zoom rooms. And we're also going to be working on the boardroom to create a Zoom room so we can have a great experience for you as the commissioners sitting in that room. There can be some commissioners at home if needed, and the general public can attend these meetings. And that's one of the great things that have happened with the Zoom meetings is now anybody can attend from anywhere and they don't have to sit in traffic. And that's a great thing that's resulted from all of this unfortunate pandemic. Authority-wide salaries and benefits reflect current salary, pension, post-employment, and worker comps rate. And the increase there is $148,000. There is some increases based off of salaries that happened last year. And there's a combination of a number of small items. And again, we budget to be safe on the conservative side to make sure that we have sufficient budget to cover everything. The programs division is about $64.2 million, and it's only going up $9,000. And if you're paying attention, sales tax is going up $10 million. Well, why isn't it going up much more? Well, again, the PED bike and the TLC programs and some other projects that we have that are in the programs division, some of those budgets are being reduced. And so therefore it's kind of a wash at that particular level. And again, we're giving out about 20% of $20 million or $100 million is a very easy $20 million going back to the cities, but now it's going to be closer to 110. So we're looking at an additional $1 or $2 million there. So we update the budgets accordingly. We work with planning to look at some of the expenditures and different programs that are going on. We increase some expenditures because we had the streetlight data subscription, but that's also offset by a number of cities that subscribe to this program. And so it's reducing, the offset of that piece by $140,000 in contribution. There's also the new VMT mitigation program that the planning staff is working on. Salaries and benefits increased $325,000 in congestion management. That is directly related to moving staff to where they're doing the most work to get reimbursed for funds, whether it's federal funds, state funds, or different programs. It's not anything out of the ordinary. Several contracts and studies are partly funded by grant revenues. And again, we're always seeking grant revenues. We want to use grant revenues first before we use Measure J. Debt service is going down $1.3 million. When we prepared the budget, we still weren't 100% completed with the refinance of our existing debt before. And due to that refinance, we were able to save about $1.3 million in this budget year's debt service payment. And so the principal amount due this year is $23.7 million, and the interest amount is $18.4 million. We pay that in September, we pay that in March, so all of that is taken care of. But we put aside 1/12 of the principal that's paid every year and 1/6 of the interest. Interest rates change for the bonds based off of our payments at 2 different times of the year. So we put an easy way to look at it. We put 1/12 of the money away every single month. And so we have a savings in there for our debt service as it comes due. So with that, staff seeks approval of resolution 2133A, revision 1, which will update the changes to the fiscal year 21-22 budget. And if anyone has any questions, I'm available for that as well.
Thank you, Brian. That was very comprehensive. So questions then from our commissioners or comments? Anyone?
I would just add, we saw this at APC. This is all good news. The refinancing, we're not holding the tens of millions of dollars that we had to hold as a reserve against our swap. We're saving money. Revenues are up. This is really just a good report. I know we're all seeing our sales tax, particularly with a pooling authority, in our community, it's up 200% over 2 years. So I think this is great. And, APC recommended this to the full committee. I'd be willing to make a motion after public hearing.
Okay. Teresa, did you have a comment?
I was going to be willing to second the motion after public hearing, and also heard it at APC. And as always, thank you, Brian.
Okay. Any other commissioners? Terry Ann, do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on this item?
No written public comment, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, so we'll bring it back. So Newell, are you making the motion then for this
Yes, I'd make a
resolution?
motion to accept the report as presented tonight, and big thanks to all of our staff, and particularly Brian in leading this effort.
And Teresa, you're seconding that.
Yes, second Geringer.
Okay, all right, thank you. So motion by Arnridge, second by Geringer. Terry Ann, can we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Arnridge,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Geringer.
Yeah.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak, Commissioner Nowak,
So.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Vice Chair Glover,
Yes.
Chair Kelly,
Yes,
Commissioner Nowak.
maybe she can't unmute.
Motion
You
passes.
probably had to step away.
Yeah.
Okay,
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Nowak and Thorpe absent.
okay, thank you.
I apologize. I had my 90-year-old dad calling with a problem. So I'm sorry I missed the vote. So I was an aye as well. I just missed the last piece, and I'd heard this during APC. So
I'll revise
Okay.
the vote to be Commissioners voted unanimously with Commissioner Thorpe absent.
thanks. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
thank you. Thank you, Sue. All right, so our next item here is considering the conduct of the meetings of the legislative bodies of the authority for April 2022. And Terry Ann, you're taking this item, are you?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
We can see your notes, Terry Ann. You just switch your screen.
Oh, you can, okay. How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
Much better.
Okay. All right. So good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and Representatives. This is a discussion item to consider the conduct of meetings for April 2022. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Authority Board has been meeting virtually since April 2020 under the Governor's executive orders and under Assembly Bill 361 since October 2021. Since October, the board has reconsidered the circumstances every 30 days and authorized meeting virtually under the Brown Act provisions of AB 361 through March 31st, 2022. AB 361 continues to apply when the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of members to meet safely in person, or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. The state of emergency is ending March 31st and is not anticipated to be extended by the governor. On March 1st, 2022, the Contra Costa Health Services released updated guidance for safely holding public meetings and is strongly recommending online meetings, mask, social distancing, and contact tracing for public meetings. Therefore, the Authority Board has the option to continue holding its meetings solely remotely under this guidance from local officials. The board has the following options to consider for conduct of meetings after March. Option 1. Continue conducting meetings remotely for all legislative bodies of the authority. Option 2, continue conducting meetings remotely for all standing and advisory committees of the authority and transition to hybrid meetings for the authority board meetings only. Both of these options require local recommendations for social distancing and reconsideration every 30 days. Option 3, transition to hybrid meetings for all legislative bodies of the authority. If the authority board should decide not to continue solely remote meetings, the authority would no longer conduct teleconferencing meetings using the Brown Act exemptions of AB 361. Brown Act requirements for teleconferencing, noticing, and public access would resume. This would allow public participation remotely, but members would be expected to attend meetings in person. And the fourth option would be to resume in-person meetings for all legislative bodies of the authority. This option would not provide a call-in or virtual option for participation. Audio streaming will be available for listening only, similar to pre-COVID meetings. Current state and local officials are strongly recommending mask, social distancing, and contact tracing, but they are no longer required. If in-person or hybrid meetings are determined, would mask, social distancing, and contact tracing be recommended or required for attendance at CCTA's public meetings? There are some key considerations and challenges that CCTA is facing. Our boardroom is not ready for hybrid meetings. We ordered cameras and equipment back in August to upgrade the boardroom to include a video component, but due to supply chain issues, they have been on back order and are not expected to arrive until possibly May, at which time installation would need to be completed. The boardroom is currently and always has been set up with an audio-only component. The carpet tiles in the boardroom have also started to curl and need to be replaced, ideally before an in-person meeting. This has been delayed due to lack of resources and qualified vendors in the commercial space. Both projects are underway, but may not be ready for in-person or hybrid meetings in April. Additionally, we are addressing public access concerns with our building manager. The building doors are currently locked. We are working with them to reopen the doors to provide public access for our meetings, but at this time, due to safety concerns, they don't have an established date for reopening the building doors. Staff recommends that we continue remote meetings and return to hybrid meetings in June to address facility challenges so long as local officials recommend social distancing measures. However, if the board wants to meet in person or hybrid before June, meetings will be live streamed via audio listening only. Staff recommends that the authority board, having heard the circumstances and challenges and the recommendations from local officials, provide direction to staff on the conduct for meetings in April and moving forward, whether that be in person, hybrid, or remote. Remote meetings can be held so long as local guidance recommends social distancing measures. If hybrid is selected, the teleconferencing option would be for the public and members would be expected to attend in person. If the authority board should decide not to continue solely remote meetings, the authority would no longer conduct teleconferencing meetings using the Brown Act exemptions of AB 361. Brown Act requirements for teleconferencing, noticing, and public access would resume. Also, to confirm if this direction applies to all legislative bodies, including standing and advisory committees, or if the direction is different for the board and committees. What safety protocol would be required or recommended for in-person or hybrid meetings, and what is the timeline or effective date for this decision? That concludes my presentation. I'm available to respond to any questions and look forward to receiving direction from the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry Ann. That was comprehensive. So questions here from commissioners or comments? Yeah, Sue?
Well, I just make a comment, in thinking about this for our city and for other public meetings, I want to make sure that whenever we go back to public meetings, they truly can be public and be as open to the public as our Zoom meetings really have been. And so if we have issues with the, video and locked doors and things like that, I think I would suggest that we delay until we can truly have meetings where either hybrid because of people's still concerns over COVID can attend freely in a hybrid sense versus having to do video only. So I would suggest we stay in Zoom mode, which is certainly easier for the public than doing something mixed until we are really ready to do that.
Second.
Understand. Newell, you've got a comment there? And please raise your hand so that I can call upon you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just to add a couple of things. One, I think we should, as Sue said, I agree. I would stay on all remote meetings through the month of April and reevaluate it as we get closer to work out some of the kinks. But here's the other problem. There's a lot of cities, other public agencies, and Danville's one of those. We're getting close to it where we're going to do hybrid meetings. But many started hybrid are now back to in-person only. And here's the reason why. If you recall, if you post, according to Brown Act, you post that you're live and you're hybrid, like on Zoom. If you have a problem with the Zoom and the connection gets a lot, some people get kicked off, you immediately have to cancel the meeting right there. That minute, you're done. So we only meet once a month. So when we go to pay our bills, I've been on several meetings now because there are more and more glitches because as the softwares are being updated, we had one last night. The person couldn't speak to us because they didn't have the latest version, and there's now a problem on getting on. So if that happens on a bigger scale, which it has, then you have to cancel the meeting because it's Brown Act. You have to stop the meeting. Then you got to repost it. Then we have to do an emergency meeting later. You got to wait for the posting requirements. So going forward, that is a huge challenge. It takes a lot of practice. We've been practicing, and every meeting something went wrong. Thank goodness we weren't doing it live. We were doing it as a practice. Our school board, the Tri-Valley cities, they've tried it and they went back to all in-person meetings. However, their committee meetings, instead of doing hybrid, they're keeping them all on Zoom or one type of platform. That has worked out really well. But I had another transportation meeting on our local bus program, and there was a glitch. We had to cancel the meeting immediately. But we have some important things we have to do, so we're waiting 72 hours. It got reposted. So as much as we thought having hybrid meetings, that was going to be the way of the future, I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're getting more or less people participating in our meetings. So one, I would personally like to see us continue our committee meetings remote only, but our board meeting to make them person in live. And I'm really hesitant to do a hybrid meeting for our regular board meetings like tonight, because the chances are something's going to go wrong. And the technologies are there, but the incompatibilities, somebody can make a complaint and say, hey, I was there, you could see me, but you wouldn't let me speak. So what do? Brown Act says they have the right. So what do? The fallback is you have to cancel the meeting, says, we apologize, we'll get this fixed, and we come back on. And I think there are a lot of things that we do at our board meeting, and it's the only meeting we have a month to pay our bills. So we can't just wait till the next month. We got to reschedule that meeting. So it's more staff time. The other thing we're finding is like Terry Ann or whoever your city clerk is, they end up running the meetings because they're the only ones that can see what's happening on Zoom, because you're sitting there live, and it changes the dynamic of the flow of the meeting. And it's real challenging. And if you happen to have a public hearing that has a lot of speakers, the person, the chair or the mayor, doesn't have the opportunity to really make that meeting flow easily. So you would want the chair to be able to see the Zoom things. And so, you know, I just think we should keep it simple. If we still have we don't have cameras, so we don't know when they're coming in. We don't know when that's going to happen. I would go back to live meetings, and if at a future date for our board meetings, we can do a combination meeting, try it. But just know, if we try it, it may fail even the first time we do it, and we'll have to cancel the meeting and restart it. So 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Newell. And are you suggesting that we go back to live meetings right away, or are you suggesting that we wait a little bit?
I'm personally okay with starting, next month for a live meeting. But Terry Ann said we have some physical things because the carpet and the curl.
Carpet
And
tiles.
by the way, use Milliken cushion back carpet, only Milliken carpet tiles. Being in the business, it's the only one that doesn't curl, and you won't replace it in our lifetime. It lasts that long. That tile was an oft brand, and it has a rubber backing, which you never should use on concrete slabs. So 2 cents.
Thank you, Newell. Federal?
No, I was just going to second the motion. I thought that it was a motion by.
Well, it's not quite a motion yet. Newell is just expressing his concerns. I want to get people's opinions before we do that. Federal, you're muted.
Oh, I apologize. I was a little bit premature. And my second, I thought that Noack was making a motion at that point.
I think we need to get comments first. So
Yeah,
thank you.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, Teresa?
So I am not making a motion, but I do support the staff's recommendation to wait until June. And then I had a question. I appreciate Newell's input, and we just had this discussion on Monday at our city council meeting as well. Input, and maybe this is a David McCray question, but I'm also going to look at Loella, because my understanding is that there is a way to have the hybrid meeting, that if you're fully AB 361, that you do have to quit the meeting, you have to stop it if something goes wrong and the public cannot participate, but that I believe Walnut Creek and maybe one other entity allows that. It's very clearly made as a courtesy. And I don't know if that's specifically within the law. Would ask David McCray to speak to that, but I would support hybrid for the opportunity to continue to allow the public to participate, but agree that if it's truly a problem with our one time a meeting, but I think there's a way to do that and to do both. But I support the staff's recommendation to wait until June until all the issues are worked out in the authority boardroom.
No, thank you. Tom? Please you have to unmute yourself, please.
There you go. I have a hard time finding the button. So I support the staff recommendation. We've got this Zoom thing down. It works really well. Got the technology down, got the logistics down. Everybody knows how to do it. And while there's a lot of advantages, and maybe we all look forward to doing this in person, I think the longer we can do it, the better. I think hybrid meetings are going to be a logistical nightmare. Personally, I think we either ought to go all live or go all Zoom. You know, for now, I support the staff recommendation.
Could I ask a question? Can we don't have an option in the future after the order expires, a health order. We can't do all hybrid. The law says we have to go back to live, but we have the option to also do online at the same time. It's not the opposite. We can continue that only temporarily, right? I mean, maybe David could answer that. But
Yeah, I
that's
think
what
we need
have.
David. We need David to give us some clarity on that. David, do you want to weigh in?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, David McCray, General Counsel for the authority. I want to just clarify a few things. Terry Ann explained that there's different types of meeting here. There's remote and then there's hybrid. If you do a hybrid meeting, it means that the commissioners need to come back into and do live. The commissioners need to be there. The hybrid portion is for the community to be able to participate via Zoom and talk. Which means that if you do hybrid, we go back to the old Brown Act without the exemptions, to where if a commissioner is going to be remote, then we have to post that location and do all of that. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page for that. The legislation to the Government Code 54953E, which is allows for the exemption of the Brown Act, says that. And Terry Ann had this in her presentation. There's two. There's the emergency, which does run out the end of this month, but the exemption also says, or if they're to continue it, if your local health authority is saying that there's still a reason for social distancing, etc. So you can continue if your local health authority keeps saying that. So even though it runs out the end of March, the emergency, there is that big or there that says you can continue as long as you meet for every 30 days to review this and say that the local health authority is still saying that recommending social distancing. So we're on solid ground to keep going forward as is.
Okay, and so if we accept staff's recommendation, we'll be on solid ground in that regard, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Luella? Luella, you need to unmute yourself, please.
That's my finger is in the air. It means I know I have to unmute. Since I was called, Walnut Creek has been hybrid since July. And we have had only one issue where the hybridization didn't work, and it's been relatively smooth. I mean, we haven't had the problems that apparently other cities have had. It takes a long time to get people in because we do it more like the mayor's conference does it, which is you're either allowed in or you have to get called in, which means, as Newell said, somebody in the staff has to be kind of monitoring the background. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't. I'm not nuts about it, but it's worked for our city. So I actually personally would like to support the non-yet motion that we do at least through June as a hybrid. And I also personally think that because planning committee meetings are frequently under a half an hour, and don't hate us, APC members, but we are very efficient. And because they're short, making somebody drive all the way from Hercules into Pleasant Hill is just cruel. So I would recommend that we approach it not from everybody, but certainly to keep the meetings going as through June. Hybrid, no, excuse me, remote.
And thank you, Luella. That is a long drive for me, just for a 22-minute meeting. I understand. Karen? We need, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with our council's comments. First of all, the emergency is not expiring March 31st. That's only for state agencies. The rest of us are still covered under AB 361 through December of 2023. There are two bills in the legislature right now. AB 1944 is the one that most of us are supporting, which will move us to what I call a new Brown Act, which means that we will be able to do hybrid, not only person or only hybrid or only through Zoom. This is the way it's probably going to go. And the purpose of 1944 is to take away the current restriction on the Brown Act, which would require all of us to put a notice on our doors if we were outside. So Mr. McCray, I'm sorry, but March is not the end of the deadline. That is only for state agencies, and we are covered till December of 2023. I believe that 1944 will be signed by the governor. I heard at a meeting this morning that it's not currently on an emergency basis, but it may go that way, but we will know in a matter of months about that. And in the interim, we can stay hybrid. I support staff's recommendation to stay hybrid for now. I will note, and I know that we may have bigger resources, but we have been doing hybrid. Today is, by the way, the second anniversary of all of us sheltering in place. So we have been doing hybrid meetings at the Board of Supervisors for 2 years, and we have never had a glitch. We have never had to stop a meeting and reschedule. I've done ABAG meetings. I've done Air Board meetings. We've never had a problem with hybrid. So, I will be supporting going into a hybrid mode in the future when we have the equipment at CCTA.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners here? No? Are there any members of the public who want to comment on this item?
I would like to just speak up real please.
Yeah.
Madam Chair. Commissioner Mitchoff is correct. I misspoke on that. And it is in our writings that it is through December 2023. So for the locals, that went March 31st is through the state. What I was focusing on is that local agency still saying that there's 6 foot, recommending that there's the 6 foot distance, and that is in place. That is as Terry Ann mentioned. So we are on solid footing going forward.
Okay, thank you. And members of the public, does anyone want to speak on this item? Yes, Mr. Olson, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I'm helping you with that, one moment. Lindsay, can you get the slide ready? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Olson?
Were you able to nope. Okay, let me try again. Oh,
yeah, we can't hear him.
Mr. Olson, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, it shows.
FYI, this is one of the glitches. If his software was not updated in the last version, he won't ever be able to unmute in this.
Mr. Olson?
Shows that you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
And now he's frozen.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't hear you. All right, is there anyone else from the public? I'm sorry, is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak on this item? Okay, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Olson, let's bring it back to the commissioners then. So we have, I guess, does someone want to make a motion?
I'll make that motion as at least the federal thought I was making. So I'll go back to making that motion.
Okay, motion by Noah.
Second what I thought I was doing.
And seconded by Glover. Any discussion? Terry Ann, can we have the roll, please?
Excuse me, can we just to make sure what the motion is?
The motion is to continue remote meetings through till June.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the staff recommendation, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Terry Ann, the roll, please.
Commissioner Arnrich,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Garinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak,
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Vice Chair Glover,
Yes.
Chair Kelly.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Thorpe absent.
Okay, thank you. So now we're on to regular items from the Planning Committee. And the first one is receiving a presentation from the MTC on the proposed transit-oriented communities policy. And we're asked to provide feedback. John Huang is taking the lead on this. John?
Good evening, Chair Kelly and Commissioners. I'm John Huang, Director of Planning. For this item, we're asking the board to receive a presentation from the MTC Metropolitan Transportation Commission regarding the transit-oriented communities policy. This policy was released back in January, and MTC is seeking feedback on the draft TOC policy. The policy has been circulated to all the cities in the county for their review and comments. Last month, MTC staff did present at the county's planning directors meeting, and cities have the option to either provide feedback directly to MTC or send to the authority, which we will then fold into our comment letter to MTC. So far, we received comments from the city of Pinole, Brentwood, Walnut Creek, Orinda, and from the county. For tonight's presentation, we've invited MTC staff to present to the authority. Staff is seeking feedback from the board on the proposed TOC policy and authorization to submit the formal comment letter to MTC, which will include comments from tonight's meeting along with other comments from staff. With that, I would like to introduce Kara Vucic from MTC.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and present to you this evening. So I have a presentation for you all, so let me share my screen. Great, everyone should be able to see that. All right. And yes, I can't advance it. All right, so tonight I want to give you some background and context on the proposed transit-oriented communities policy, give you an overview of what we've been proposed, as well as talk about some of the feedback that we've been hearing as we've been meeting with cities and counties and other transit agencies throughout the region, highlight some of the key issues as we move forward in policy development, and then our next steps. So I'm going to start with and some of you may have seen this slide already, so I apologize for the repeat, but I think it can be helpful to kind of contextualize this in terms of why we're doing this now and how it fits into the other work that we're doing at MTC. So as you see on this slide, highlighted in red is the transit-oriented development policy that was adopted in 2005 as part of the Resolution 3434 Transit Expansion Program. And I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about what that policy did versus what we're proposing in the transit-oriented communities policy. But hopefully, as this slide conveys, there's been a lot of change at both the regional and state levels in terms of transportation and land use policy, which is a big motivation for undertaking this update, as well as the fact that many of the projects to which the 2005 transit-oriented development policy applied have either been completed or are under construction. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the two policies. All right, so as I think most of you know, or all of you may know, Plan Bay Area 2050, our regional plan, our regional long-range plan was adopted unanimously in the fall of last year. And the update, when we undertook the update to the TOD policy, which really kind of kicked off at the end of 2020, was really based in Plan Bay Area and implementation of Plan Bay Area. And so the proposed transit-oriented communities policy takes a much broader approach in its effort to really focus on Plan Bay Area implementation. And the strategies that it addresses are highlighted on the right side of this slide. And two in particular are really the focus of the proposed policy. The strategy to have a greater mix of housing, particularly around transit, as well as to increase the density of jobs that are accessible by transit. So this slide again emphasizes or provides an overview of how the focus of the policy, of the proposed policy, was really on connecting Plan Bay Area 2050 transit investments with the strategies, including also thinking about the regional housing needs allocation and our need to increase housing in our region. And so the proposed TOC policy goals really focus on this. The first goal is to increase density for new residential development and to prioritize affordable housing in transit-rich areas, which are those locations that are within 1/2 mile of transit stops or stations that provide rail, ferry, or frequent bus service. The second goal is focused on increasing densities for new commercial development, particularly in regional transit hubs that are served by multiple transit providers. The third goal complements the first two goals, which seek to locate more households and jobs in transit-rich areas by focusing on improving multimodal access to high-quality transit, particularly to and from areas that are beyond that 1/2 mile radius, or what's typically a 10-minute walk. And that includes many of our equity priority communities, some of which are located near our high-quality transit stops and stations, but many of which are outside that 1/2 mile radius or 10-minute walk. And then the fourth and final goal acknowledges the need for continuing regional support and facilitation of partnerships to implement the policy and to create equitable transit-oriented communities within our region. Oops. All right. So a quick overview of what was the 2005 TOD policy and how does that compare to what's being proposed with the transit-oriented communities policy. So the resolution 3434 TOD policy only applied to the 1/2 mile station areas for specific transit expansion corridors, and those were specifically named projects. There had to be a minimum amount of housing either built, planned, or zoned within that corridor that essentially correlated to the type of transit service that was being built. And the policy requirements had to be satisfied before regional discretionary funds were programmed or allocated for the transit expansion project. With the proposed TOC policy, it's really taken a much broader approach, largely because circumstances now are very different than they were in 2005 in many ways. And again, focusing on Plan Bay Area implementation, transit-rich areas specifically, and transit-rich priority development areas with existing or future high-quality transit. And again, the focus is on fixed guideway transit, rail, bus rapid transit, ferry services, and it would include both extensions and major improvements to those services. And then the requirements for the TOC policy go beyond simply development or just housing development at stations, which is a big impetus for the name change, to focus on residential and office densities around transit, affordable housing and anti-displacement policies, parking management, and station access and circulation. So my next set of slides go into detail on the proposed policy requirements, and I will preface this by saying this is very much under development, and this is really where we have been focusing on our outreach to local jurisdictions and transit agencies, and really trying to understand what currently are they doing in terms of their planning and zoning around transit, how these requirements might affect them, what are some of the potential issues or unintended consequences that might result, so that we can then take all of that feedback and move forward with making revisions to the policy. So what was originally proposed for the requirement for residential and office density is that the requirement would specify minimum densities for future growth. Again, this would apply to new development around high quality transit that would be needed for Plan Bay Area implementation. And these densities, as you can see on the chart on this slide, are tied to the level of transit service, with the idea being that in locations, for example, with regional transit hubs that are served by multiple BART lines or BART and Caltrain, those types of locations can really support much higher densities for both residential and office development. And as you go down in terms of transit service available, the expectation is that lower densities, the higher densities may not be achievable, or we're not going to be able to support them as well with the transit service that's available, and so the densities are lower. We've taken a look at some plans and projects, and I've got some project examples to just give you a sense of what some of these density ranges, the originally proposed density ranges look like. But some of the feedback that we've gotten as we've been talking to local jurisdictions is to focus potentially on fixed guideway transit. So that might exclude in Tier 3 just bus service that provides 15-minute headways during peak periods. The concern there being that there needs to be confidence that transit service is going to be reliable, frequent enough, and that the service spans are going to be long enough so that people can really use it to make multiple types of trips in order to support higher intensity development. And then we've also had a lot of discussion in terms of what the density ranges should be in different parts of the region. And so I think we're going to be taking a much closer look at that and coming up with revisions to that, as well as how those density ranges should be calculated in terms of, lifting the ceiling, so to speak, on the maximum allowable densities allowed, as well as potentially setting a floor in terms of ensuring that new development happens at least a density high enough to really support our transit investments in the region. And so the next set of slides that I have are some project examples just to illustrate some of these densities. I know that as someone who does not work in a local planning department, it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily picture images of what these densities look like don't readily come to mind. So I just wanted to share that with you all. So these are some examples of what, that highest tier, in places like downtown Oakland, downtown San Francisco, of what 150 to 200 dwelling units per acre looks like, and what an office project of with a floor area ratio of 6 to 8 looks like. And then at the next tier down, these are locations with regional rail, BART, Caltrain, for example, light rail transit, and bus rapid transit. Again, project examples of apartments in the ranges of, or multifamily housing in the ranges of 75 to 100, and office buildings with floor area ratios of 3 to 5. And I'm sure, as you all know, how these densities manifest, very much depends on the particular site and how the building is configured as well. So again, these are sort of general examples. And then lastly, at the lowest tier, what the range of 35 to 50 units an acre looks like, and floor area ratios of 2 to 4. So as I said, we're very much in the process of revising the requirements. And so in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in terms of what's been proposed, but we are going to focus for the requirement for affordable housing and anti-displacement policies to provide a menu of policy options so that a local jurisdiction would be required to adopt 2 or more of the policy options that address affordable housing production, affordable housing preservation, and affordable housing protection, either as an overlay in the transit-rich area or PDA, or jurisdiction-wide. Some of the feedback that we've received on this is just ensuring that the menu is broad enough to really accommodate the different types of housing markets that exist throughout the region. And just the different conditions that exist, where some places, particularly in locations where a new transit station may be being built, housing may not exist sometimes in those locations. With respect to parking management, the focus of this requirement is really to ensure that jurisdictions have transit supportive parking policies and requirements in place that really prioritize active transportation and shared modes. One of the things we're really seeking to avoid with this requirement is the overbuilding of parking, particularly in locations that are walkable, where people can walk to transit, and transit service is robust enough that it enables them to make multiple types of trips on transit, and they can perhaps walk and bike to other destinations and don't necessarily need to use a car for all of their trips or even the majority of their trips. So like the density requirement, this requirement would also be tiered again to the level of transit service that's available. Some of the feedback that we've also gotten is some of the parking management options should be expanded. Again, particularly in more suburban locations, there needs to be more flexibility in terms of at least in the nearer term for allowing for more parking until more robust transit options can be provided. And then lastly, for station access and circulation, the focus is on requiring planning and policies that really prioritize and facilitate station access via active transportation and shared modes such as buses and shuttles, as well as going through a process of really identifying needed infrastructure and service improvements so that as large of an area as possible can be accessed by a 10 or 15-minute walk, bicycle ride, or a bus or shuttle trip. So some of the key issues for policy development, and I think some of you were at the January 14th Planning Committee meeting. One of the really kind of key issues with the policy is on policy compliance, timing of policy implementation, and the relationship to funding. I think some of the feedback that we've gotten is that, unlike the 2005 TOD policy, there's a lot of concern about linking this to transit project funding. And so that's, I think, something that, we're looking very closely at. At the same time, we've also received feedback that there really needs to be more of a focus on providing funding incentives as opposed to conditioning funding, which is also something that we're, really seeking feedback on and thinking about various options for that as well. For the requirements, for the policy requirements, the challenge here is really balancing having requirements that are relatively straightforward with requirements that are also effective, but that can also accommodate the wide variety of land uses throughout the region, but even sometimes within a station area itself. And then lastly, resources, making sure that we have the resources available for policy implementation, particularly in the initial years after the policy is adopted. We really want to focus on providing resources to local jurisdictions to help them with compliance. So ensuring that we have funding for planning and technical assistance grants, as well as then for ongoing policy, to support ongoing policy compliance. And then concluding my second to last slide here, I just want to give you an overview of the outreach that we've been doing in February and March. So I think we've met by this week, I think we'll have met with almost all of the planning directors in each of the counties. We've also had a number of individual meetings with cities to really kind of have much more deeper dives and discussions in terms of how the policy might affect them and getting their feedback on how the requirements might be structured and what makes sense. And that all of those conversations have been extremely helpful for us in really informing how we move forward with revisions to the policy. So for next steps, we are going to be presenting to the ABAG Executive Board tomorrow. So some of you may be seeing this presentation or a very similar presentation again. We'll be going to the MTC Policy Advisory Council in April. And we'll be continuing to develop revisions to the policy proposal based on feedback. We plan on going back to the joint MTC Planning ABAG Admin Committee on May 13th with an information item to provide the committee with an update on the outreach that we've done, the feedback that we've got, and the direction that we think makes sense to go in based on all of that feedback for revising the initially proposed policy and moving forward with a draft final policy. We would then expect to bring that back for consideration by a final policy back for consideration by the Joint Committee and the Commission to be determined, but potentially July of this summer. And with that, I will conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you. That's pretty comprehensive. And you got through a lot of material pretty fast.
I've had a lot of practice.
I can tell it's a heck of a lot. So thank you very much. Sue, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I guess, after hearing this, I'm a little confused. We're all going through our housing elements right now, right? And for example, Pleasant Hill, we don't have any transit. I mean, it's all outside Pleasant Hill. We have some buses, but none of them are at 15-minute headways. Yet we're having to do, 30 to 50, 70 to 100 densities because of our housing element. Yet we'd be in tier 3 or below in your scenario, and that would say all the densities we're doing, we shouldn't be doing. So to me, it seems a little conflicting as to what we're all going through with our housing elements, and then assigning a different overlay on transit-related housing. So I'm
yeah. Well,
confused.
let me clarify. Sorry for not being clear when I presented that. So the idea behind that would be those would be minimums, and we would certainly, encourage jurisdictions to go even higher densities around transit if that was feasible. I think what we're trying to do with the densities is ensure that at least that density is being built for new development around transit, and that we're not seeing projects come in that are lower than those densities or whatever the revised densities are going to be.
And you think some of those cities' housing element numbers are low enough that they're not doing that anyway?
I don't. And I don't know.
I can't imagine that they don't already have that. I mean, if Pleasant Hill is 1,800 units with no transit in Pleasant Hill, I can't even imagine those cities that have it must have pretty significant numbers already, sort of targeted for that. So I'm just still a little confused seems like a lot of work for something that's already being sort of done through the housing element. So that's my.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment. And I will just add that I think that's also one of the things that we're continuing to work on is to get better information in terms of what's already being done and to coordinate that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Newell?
Kara, thanks for the presentation. You did an excellent job and cover a lot of information. I guess a couple of concerns and questions. One, it appears, we call them policies and everything, but these are restrictions, which means I'm sort of adding up probably on two hands the number of cities are going to qualify for this money. So it's changing the rules. And I think as Commissioner Nowak was just mentioning, like in Danville, we have 2,241 units. San Ramon, 5,500 units, and none of us have these transportation things. So we're getting zero. So there's only Walnut Creek, Concord, maybe a couple of other on the lines that would qualify for any of this. But truthfully, when you look at those standards and how high they are, they really look at, I can pick those cities and they're the same ones that get everything. And they're also mostly the cities that caused all the problems that we have. So that's a concern, and I get it. That's MTCs, that's the direction. We're going to change the world. We're going to say you have to build your cities like this. And by the way, you don't get any money. So the question is, isn't this mostly federal money or is it all federal money? If so, what other monies are mixed in with this and what legal rights do you have? Because federal money, you can't change the rules on, right? That money's authorized. It has to go for that criteria. And you can't say, well, I'm going to pass along, oh, I'm going to add some more rules. Can't do that for federal money. So what's the source of all the money? Or is this general and is it going to be different for different sources of money?
Yeah, no, and that's an excellent point. So we, in terms of the funds that MTC really has discretion over, it's actually not a huge amount. And so really probably what it comes down to is the One Bay Area grant program. That's one program where we do have some discretion in terms of how funding is allocated. And so I think at this point, OBAG 3 is moving, which is the next cycle of the One Bay Area grant program, is much further along than where this policy is. And so the focus of OBAG 3 would really be on providing planning support for policy implementation. Where then there might be a tie between funding and the TOC policy would be in the next cycle of OBAG would be for OBAG 4. And that is yet to be determined. I think some of the ideas that are being discussed are about allocating a greater portion of OBAG discretionary funds for cities that are subject to and then complying with the transit-oriented communities policy, for example. But again, I think some of the issues that you're bringing up are definitely the kinds of things that we are seeking feedback on.
So my question then on the federal money, what are we talking about? Is this, going forward, are we looking at just federal money? Are we looking at state money? Are we looking at only locally generated funds, or what's that?
Well, I would say, yeah, I mean, MTC doesn't have authority or discretion over locally generated funds, obviously like Measure J, for example. And so, and in terms of state funds, I don't believe we have the same discretion over those as we do over something like OBAG, which is Federal Surface Transportation Program Congestion Mitigation Air Quality,
Right.
SDPCMAC funding. And so really that's where the focus is. So it's actually, out of all of the funding that flows through MTC, OBAG is not insignificant, but it's a relatively smaller portion.
So RM3, it's obviously it's
Yeah.
still in medication, unfortunately. So is this going to affect RM3 monies?
I think we looked at that, and that was potentially part of the initial proposal, and that it might be subject to, for example, transit expansion projects that were requesting RM3 funds, that those could be somehow conditioned or related to the transit-oriented communities policy. We got a lot of feedback, as you won't be surprised to hear, from transit agencies that were very concerned about that. And I think as we looked closer at that, there was a lot of concern about, given how much things have changed, is really that the right approach? And I think the way that we've been thinking about this, and again, this is where we're, I think, looking for feedback, is, wanting to, we have a pretty heavy lift in terms of what we've committed ourselves to under Plan Bay Area. And what is it going to take to implement that, and ensure that we're really moving that forward? And so, the question, so that it's been a debate that's been going on in terms of is the best way to do that through incentives? Is the best way to do that through conditioning funding in some way? And that's really been the focus of the discussion. So I don't have an answer for you.
Okay, so
other than to just kind of try and capture sort of what we've been talking about, and what are the kind of issues and concerns that we've been hearing and discussing.
Well, I appreciate that, but it also sounds like you've sort of let in that RM3 money. Now, this is a voter approved money, so it already has its own restrictions. I guess Contra Costa would be concerned because RM3, we're donors. We were promised we're only getting 40 cents on the dollar of what we should be getting. And there was a promise to get that. And it sounds like the restrictions going on here, Contra Costa is almost going to not qualify. Now you can say, oh, in the future, but just, I'm giving you my personal opinion that I do not believe one or two cities might. The criteria is such a high standard for the future utopian imaginary environment that likely is not going to happen. As we're seeing the shift in housing and work, job-related things, we're still going on the same pathway. COVID taught us how to do business differently. Most of us, my companies, we're doing different. We have finally gotten rid of almost all of our leases, and we're doing mostly virtual meetings, and our habits have changed, and we live work. These policies don't necessarily support that. They support a theoretical idea that doesn't necessarily apply to most of us in Contra Costa County. So in truthfulness, we're sitting here, and the reality is it's not going to help us. And if you're going to suggest that, oh, yeah, maybe we'd be talking about RM3 monies, and we're already short on that, and we supported it. And I was one of the ones who got all of our local newspapers to support that. And the other coalitions, that I'm getting the sense we're not going to get this. And as MTC, your vision is not going to allow us to participate in this. And so again, we're right back where we are. We don't get the funding because you change the rules to the degree that they don't fit this type of an area. And you want us to somehow be something different, but yet you can't get there because you keep changing the standard, higher and higher densities and that, and it's going to help all those other places. It's not going to help us. So if there's a concern, that's it. It's about money and the color of money. So yeah, I'm real worried now that you sort of let out that RM3 may be part of this discussion. And that needs to be transparent. And there's going to be another lawsuit over that, because that's a voter approved. And then they're, and I don't agree with the lawsuit going on now, but we're creating stagnation, and we're helping a handful of cities. And the cities, we still have this idea of getting people to San Francisco. Stop that. Stop it. People should not be going to San Francisco. They should be staying in their communities, living and working and enjoying all the assets and the wonderful things we built. But your utopian version in MTC that 2050 is really changing that. We're going to be left out where we are. So, I don't know how to put that in everything, but a long list of things. It's a real concern of where we're heading with this. That if you put those kinds of restrictions on money, you're cutting us off at the knees that we're never, ever going to be able to get out of where we are. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment and for explaining. Thank you.
Tim, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Kelly. I wanted to kind of put this in context a little bit. Right now we're looking really hard at the OBAG 3 funding cycle right now, and as much as it's not done by formula and not allocated by formula anymore, it's more of a competitive process. But the OBAG 3 funds that we're targeting for Contra Costa County are about $48 million over the next like 4 to 5 years. So this TOC policy would govern over that potential OBAG funds in the future. So I know Kara talked about using some of the OBAG 3 money to support the planning aspects and implementing the TOC policy for certain local jurisdictions. But as we look ahead to future cycles of OBAG 4, we're talking about an order of magnitude of like $50 to $60 to $70 million here that this policy would potentially govern over time. So I just want to kind of bring that in context. I know Commissioner Arnwich really focused on RM3, but there is OBAG 4 funds that are both, these are CMAQ and STP funds that have a lot of flexibility and discretionary to them on how we actually fund projects in the future. So this policy will be governing over those types of programs.
And do we think we'll comply, Tim? You didn't say that. I mean, are you saying you're worried about that? I don't think we're going to get those $70 million based on this new criteria.
So based on the new criteria, I think, John, our director of planning, is doing an assessment on right now of what kind of impact this policy will have to all the local jurisdictions. But based on that, I mean, it's going to have restrictions to certain local jurisdictions, PDAs, et cetera, as we kind of look towards the future. So, I mean, maybe John, if you want to talk about what your current findings are right now.
Yeah, Commissioner. So for OBAG 3, we're in the middle of developing the policy, which we'll be bringing to you in May for adoption. But we're seeing challenges already just for the existing PDA criteria that MTC has introduced. Primarily, the $48 million Tim is actually mentioning it's not guaranteed. It's a targeted amount. So before, where it used to be allocated to the CCTA to be distributed to the cities, it's not by formula anymore. It's not an allocation anymore. So that's number one. The number two, MDC has added PDA, priority development areas, criteria, and also transit-rich area criteria, which I've heard from a few cities already that that would be problematic for the smaller cities and for the cities that doesn't have PDAs area. So 70% of the funding that we propose will have to be within PDAs or within the definition of PDAs, which is within a mile of a PDA area. So we're seeing challenges already when we're meeting with the cities. So those are the two main things that's impacting OBAG 3.
And I would just add, I mean, stacking on all of those affordable housing policies for local jurisdictions to adopt. I mean, each local jurisdiction is going to have challenges with each of those policies. And so, and I think that this kind of one size fits all solution really needs to be addressed in future iterations of this policy. I think it's going to impact us. There's going to be some cities that are not going to be eligible for funding in the future. And we need to have the policy address that in terms of developing potentially more tiers or more requirements that are more focused towards, rural and suburban and smaller cities that are in a county like Contra Costa County. This policy is really focused on the big three, and it's not necessarily really focused on communities like ours in Contra Costa County. And so I think it's important to address that in future iterations of the policy. And the overall policy, I mean, I actually see Ms. Vorderberg in here. I'm looking forward to her comments, but she's going to have some good comments about how it's going to impact housing, et cetera, in the county. And so there's a lot of impacts for this policy. And I think it's the policy itself and requiring and tying it to discretionary funds is we're not able to really understand how OBAG 3 and future OBAG iterations are going to help move the needle forward in terms of priority development areas. I mean, we set forward these priority development areas to really help move the target to make these areas more attractive and for people for development. And if we keep on moving the bar and moving the target, we're never really going to see how, the policy from 2 years ago actually impacted or actually improved, those PDAs. And, the other thing is we're going to be doing an integrated transit plan. And so as we do an integrated transit plan and as we start looking at ways to improve transit and make transit more efficient and attractive in our county and potentially adding additional transit stops, this policy would also be subject to those additional transit stops in the future. As you can remember, in 2020, we were talking about implementing a transit first policy where we were encouraging our transit operators to operate at 15-minute headways. And if we do that, those transit stops are going to be subject to this policy. Wherever a bus service is at 15 minutes or more of service, it'll be subject to this policy. And you may not want, high density development at, for example, Diablo Valley College in the middle of Pleasant Hill. So I'm just that's an example.
Thank you. Pedro?
I just wanted to thank for the presentation because I think it has opened up this conversation to exactly how we do the funding for the regional measure, and that we are subject to probably not get a lot of that funding. So Newell, I thank you for all of your comments, and I'm hoping that this is taken back as a part of a further discussion. And that's why the rounds are being made right now to exactly get these type of comments, so that when myself and Amy sit there on MTC and try to fight these things, that the voices of CCTA are heard very loud and clear. So I really appreciate your comments tonight, Newell.
Thank you. Other commissioner comments? Well, before we go to the public, I would just like to echo what Newell had said. A lot of us in smaller cities, we try where we can. My city tries to put, dense development along major arteries, but many cities don't have that, and many cities don't have the ability to create this. And so we begin to feel like we're really being left out. And with more people working at home now or working hybrid, these are creating wonderful places where people, as Newell said, can live and work. We're not all drifting to Oakland and San Francisco. So we would like to be able to have some of this funding too, and work with you to really create transit policies that are beneficial to all of our communities. There's not one size fits all. And I'd like to recognize Amy now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Cara, thank you very much for your presentation and to come out to all of our, the transportation authorities and the city planning directors. And this is, as you know, happening all over the region. Just in terms of a little bit of context, this came to the planning and joint planning and administration committee just, what is it, a month or so ago, 6 weeks ago. I'm trying to remember, time flies here. Yeah. And I think what came out of that meeting was that it was very important for MTC to really do a lot of outreach and engage transportation authorities, local city planning directors. As you know, we've been making reports about this at the mayor's conference. And so it's really important from the standpoint of getting the information showing the impact, and it really will represent a huge amount of money moving forward. That's, still up in the air as to what funds are going to be, this will apply. It's basically, MTC has jurisdiction over all these federal discretionary funds. That's, just part of the law. So this is, consistent with the policy, with the authority that the commission has, but it is a commission made up of representatives from around the Bay, from cities and counties. So I just think it's very helpful for your planning directors and our planning directors. I want to thank John and CCTA for in engaging this, is to really look at this in detail to see how it could or couldn't be implemented. It's a combination of densities as well as housing policies. And Sue brought up a really important point that all of our cities are going through a lot of upzoning for the current RHNA, and what this policy would contemplate would be additional upzoning very quickly after that. So I think that this outreach is pointing out a lot of things that may not have been abundantly clear as these policies, these draft policies were being developed. And I really want to echo Tim's comments about the BIA and Lisa Vorderberg and Paul Campos. I think they're giving this a really good look. The whole goal is to produce housing. The whole goal is to produce housing. And so they are providing a lot of input as, we move forward. We're fortunate to have Lisa from Contra Costa County, so she knows these counties well, and they're doing a lot of work all around the Bay Area. So, just thank you for your input. As Federal indicated, it's going to be really important for us to really know all the facts on the ground as we go to discuss these policies and ultimately come up with something from the draft to the actual. But I think for the first time, there's also been a real push to include the cities and ABAG in this process, so that the cities really have a real solid opportunity to weigh in, and the transportation authorities. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And a real quick question for Kara. How long do cities have the opportunity to send you feedback?
Well,
realistically.
It's actually extended now. So we're going to be going to the planning committee in May, again, as an information item. And I think all the way up until, so just kind of working back. So if we brought a draft final policy to the commission for their consideration in July, we have to submit our committee materials by the first week of June, essentially. And so what we're thinking is that if we get comments up through, I would say mid-April, that still gives us enough time, I think, to be able to make revisions and react to that. So I would also offer too that this planning committee meeting at which we're going to be, sorry, I meant to say May, not April. The planning committee meeting at which we're going to be presenting a revised policy proposal in May is going to be another opportunity to offer comment, both at that meeting or before that meeting, at that meeting, and then immediately following. So
Okay,
sorry, that was a very long answer when I could have just said mid-May.
Mid-May, either at the meeting, or cities or other entities like CCTA could submit comments up to then too.
Yes.
Tim, did you want to have something to add here?
I was just actually going to follow up on this, the kind of next steps in the comments, but John has been working with your local jurisdictions and the planning directors on getting comments from the planning directors, and John is putting together an actual comment letter from CCTA. And so what we want to make sure we get direction from the board today is do we want to send a comment letter from the board to MTC on this policy? And I think it's gonna be yes, but I just want to make sure we get that formal motion from the board as we conclude our discussion here.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioner comments? Then are there members of the public who wants to speak on this item? And if so, please raise your hand. And Lisa Vorderbruggen, I see your hand raised. please unmute yourself, Terry, and help her and go ahead.
Lisa, you should be able to unmute now.
There we go. You had to give me permission to unmute. That's a new one. So, so we get through these things. Thanks for letting me comment. I've been fortunate enough to serve on the technical advisory committee for the development of this policy with Kara. So good to see you, Kara. BI has been involved in looking at this policy, and since the draft came out in January, I've been shopping it around with a number of our builders, and universally our builders and our architects and everything say that the density thresholds that are being proposed in tier 1 are feasible only in the very high dense core areas of San Francisco and Oakland. Tier 2, there's a few areas that might be able to do it, and tier 3 is of course better. So if it makes little sense to adopt policies for zoning that are that's economically infeasible. These projects simply cannot be built at these densities. And if you rezone it all and try to make it your market for a BART station development in Pittsburgh and Lafayette is vastly different than a market in some of the other areas in the community within the Bay Area. So our concern is that there seems to be little relationship between the aspirational goals of the policy, which are great. We really do need to densify near transit. We do need to do all of these things. But we really would like to see a more realistic aspirational increase that's being desired in these specific areas that makes more sense, because 100% of zero is zero, right? So you can't build the housing at those levels. You don't get the housing, and because it's too expensive to build, the market won't support it at most of these densities. So we had expressed those concerns to Tim and to Amy and to federal, on that front. And for the jurisdictions that don't get this transportation money, that's economic development money in their communities, which helps these communities support and attract new housing that they need as they go through their housing element process. So that's been kind of our approach in looking at this and trying to ground truth it in terms of what can actually be built, around a transit station in the city of Oakley or the city of Antioch or in Richmond. These markets are all very different, and what a builder can get a loan to build and what people will buy or what they can afford to rent are very real on the ground things that we should consider as we try to continue to push the envelope without necessarily going so far out there in terms of the goals that we lose track of what we're trying to do. And with that, if anybody has any questions, we're working on comments as well, trying to herd the cats that are my members, the developers, to get all the comments in. So
thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Other comments out here? Does anybody else from the public want to speak?
No other comments.
No other comments. Okay, so we will bring it back to the commission here. And I know that John Huang is seeking some feedback regarding sending a formal comment letter. Is this something that the board wants to do? Newell,
Yes.
You're shaking do you want to make a motion?
I would make a motion that we send a letter to include everything Tim has talked about, and as well as all the concerns that have been shared here tonight. Lisa brought up some real concerns. And also to acknowledge that we all have to meet our housing elements, and we're going through those, and they're all tough. I don't care where you are in Contra Costa County, to meet all those goals are tough. This is adding another layer that's not even related, that we ought to say, look, if we meet our housing elements and we're doing that, and the state is coming after us, they hired an extra 80 attorneys to force us to make sure we're in compliant. So let's do that and not add, as Lisa has pointed out, another artificial layer that is not related to that. So I think we can cover that, but it's important that we get this in writing and as soon as possible. I see the train has left the station in a lot of ways.
I'll second it.
Okay, so motion by Arnridge, second by Nowak. Teresa Geringer, do you have comments?
I had a question. I was happy to second as well, but absolutely support CCTA sending in a comment letter. I did have a question about to John. First of all, thank you for conducting all the planning meetings with our planning directors, and thank you, Kara, for also attending those. When's the deadline for us as cities to submit comments to CCTA if it's going to be part of it. I get the May 15th or mid-May for submitting them directly to MTC, but what about to you, John?
That's a great question, Commissioner. So initially, I had asked the cities to submit comment by February 18th, but understanding that there's an extension for the comment, I'll send out a follow-up email to all the planning directors. I can, if our deadline is mid-May, I'll maybe probably extend the deadline for the cities through the end of April.
Is it really mid-May, or I thought Kara had said mid-April?
Kara had corrected that, Kara, to mid-May. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I guess, there is sort of two phases. So like I said, we're going to bring an information item to the planning committee, to the ABAG MTC planning committee at their May 13th meeting. So that will be an opportunity. We have to submit our materials for that meeting basically by the first week of April. So if you have comments that you want us to, and feedback that you want us to incorporate kind of on the earlier side of that, we would need to receive them by the end of this month, realistically. Now, that is not going to be the only opportunity to comment, because like I said, we're going to be bringing this as an information item to the planning committee at their May meeting, which I believe is May 13th. Fortunately, I have the slide still up, which is May 13th. So that will be another opportunity to comment on both the proposed revisions that we present to them at that meeting, and then after for some time afterward as well.
Okay,
does that make sense? And I apologize for not being clearer about this.
No, that's fine. Actually, Carol, that's thanks for clarification. And actually, to follow up on Commissioner Arnrich, a proposal to send our comments in earlier rather than later. So I'll modify that schedule to maybe make sure that we get all the comments in. I'm looking at the schedule here. We'll make sure we'll get our comments in by the end of the month.
By the end of March, John, is that right?
Yes, the end of the month, yes.
Yes. So yes, end of March would be ideal, but that's not going to be the only opportunity, I think is how I should put it. Yeah. Thank you. So, and again, I apologize for the lack of clarity.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, John, for reaching out to all the planning directors as well. Okay, so there's a motion before us. It's been seconded to send the comment letter. Terry Ann, I guess we need a vote on this.
Yes.
So can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Arnrich?
Yes.
Commissioner Butt?
Yes.
Commissioner Geringer?
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew?
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson? Commissioner Hudson? Maybe gone. Okay, Commissioner Mitchell?
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
Vice Chair Glover?
Yes.
Chair Kelly?
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson, let me just check here. Okay, it looks like motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Hudson and Thorpe absent.
Okay, thank you, Terry Ann. And thank you, Kara, for coming and presenting to us. This has stimulated a lively discussion, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next item, and Peter Engel is taking this. This is a request for qualifications for consulting services to complete the Contra Costa Integrated Transit Plan. Peter?
Thank you, Chair Kelly, and good evening, Commissioners. Peter Engel, Director of Programs for CCTA. I had planned on about a 35-minute presentation for you tonight, but based on the discussion ahead of this, I think it's pretty clear that the ITP, the Integrated Transit Plan, is really front and center for us all. There's a lot of regional policies and issues, as well as local issues associated with public transit in our county. And as Tim mentioned earlier, the idea of the Integrated Transit Plan first started as part of the 2020 Transportation Expenditure Plan as a transit first policy. Later in 2020, of course, with COVID and previous to COVID, actually, MTC convened a Blue Ribbon Task Force to look at how to better coordinate the 27 transit operators in the Bay Area make transit more attractive for regional travelers. And the work from the Blue Ribbon Task Force resulted in 27 action items to improve regional transit travel. The result of that action plan made it clear that it was in the best interest of Contra Costa County and its transit operators to present to the region a documented coordination and integrated effort, which would be the integrated transit plan, which we think will serve as a blueprint for a customer-centered approach to transit delivery in Contra Costa County in a post-pandemic environment. There's multiple, as you all know, multiple regional transit stations between BART and Ferry and Amtrak in our county. And it really provides significant opportunities for bus and other mobility transfers and connections. And so we want to identify these opportunities for making public transit more attractive to the customer. And not only from a regional perspective, but we want to make sure we keep our local flavor and make sure that our local citizens that don't necessarily make regional trips are provided with the service that they need and they're dependent on. So as part of this, the Contra Costa bus operators agreed to taking a proactive approach to the region's efforts and that we should prepare this countywide integrated transit plan. And so with little outreach to MTC, we got a contribution of $500,000 from MTC. Our bus operators agreed to contribute a total of $1 million of their fiscal year 2020-2021 Measure J allocation to the study. These are funds that have not been allocated yet. As you recall, we had a projection of I believe it was 92 million in total sales tax funds for that year, and it came in significantly higher than that. So these funds were to be allocated in this coming year, and the transit operators at their Bus Transit Coordinating Council said that they wanted to, provide $1 million of those funds to help support this study, and then the authority will commit another $500,000 in CMA planning funds that we have available to us to help support this study. The proposed procurement methodology that we want to use is a request for qualifications. There's a lot going on in the region. There's a lot of things happening right now with policies and initiatives that the region is taking on, and we want to, at least to a certain extent, have a scope of work, but also be somewhat flexible in how we do this. So we want to do a request for qualifications to find the best agency that has experience, innovation, a good approach to doing this, and we want to base our main decision on that. There's a list of the proposed selection criteria provided in the staff report, along with some anticipated deliverables. I think just want to point out a couple of the deliverables, and the list that's in the staff report is some of the key deliverables. We anticipate that there will probably be some more after discussion and listening and seeing proposals and talking to some of the proposing consultants. But we want to do a public survey to understand the community goals within each community with respect to public transit, as well as we want to get a feel for post-COVID travel expectations. The transit operators have expressed to us in this process that they really don't know how to move forward until they get a better feel for, kind of the post-COVID demand. So that's something that we want to try and get a feel for through some surveying work. Another thing that's important is that there has been a lot of efforts in Contra Costa County, or between the suburban operators, in already improving transfers and fare integration and multi-agency procurements. So it's important to document that and make it part of the story that this study would be, to show that our county has been upfront in really trying to coordinate a lot of services, even though other parts of the region have not done that, because we see this as suburban operators as as a way to really make service more efficient and provide better service to the community. We also want to define some metrics that really look at equity and community needs, as opposed to kind of the traditional efficiency, which is important, and those will be there too. But it's really important to dig into the community and find out what their needs are from a local perspective. So these are just a few of the things that that we want to identify and put forward as part of this RFQ. I just want to also mention that prior to posting the RFQ, we need to get an authorization to proceed or an E76 from Caltrans Local Assistance, and also establish a disadvantaged business enterprise or DBE goal. That process has started, and we're moving forward with that. And then the final scope will be, as we've been working with the transit operators, we'll continue to work with them on the final scope and get buy-off from them as well as MTC. So I've cut my 35-minute report down to just a few minutes for you to get through your evening, and happy to answer any questions or you know, Tim, obviously this is a high priority for Tim and the authority for this coming year. So open it up to him if he has anything to add, or certainly answer any questions.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. Questions from the commissioners? Comments?
Let's move forward.
All right. So does someone want to make a motion then to make this allocation?
Public
Move
comment.
approval.
Second.
All right. I think it was federal. So motion by Glover, seconded by Mitchoff. Any other comments or discussion? And Tim, did you want to say something?
Did we get comments from the public?
Oh, that's right. We didn't get comments from the public. Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who wants to comment on this? Please raise your hand. I don't see anyone. Terry Ann, do you?
No public comments.
Yeah, I think we just sort of assumed that everybody's kind of behind this. Thank you. So we have a motion here. Any other comments? No, so let's take a vote. Terry Ann, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Arnridge,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Geringer,
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak,
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Vice Chair Glover,
Yes.
Chair Kelly.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Hudson and Thorpe absent.
Thank you. And so our last item on the Planning Committee regular agenda items is again with Peter. And this is approval to enter into a funding agreement with Contra Costa County for $1,400,000 of Measure X funds to support the implementation elements of the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan. Peter?
Great, thank you again. I guess if this was a rock concert, I'd be the lead act for tonight, right? The closing act. So this is an exciting item. This is the first item that the Accessible Transportation Task Force has brought to you. And it's also about funding, which is great. The Contra Costa Board of Supervisors has allocated $1.4 million to support the implementation of the Accessible Transportation Task Force. We have identified 4 items to use that funding to support in this first year. Those are continue work to identify a coordinating entity to move forward, support of the One Seat Ride pilot program that started a year ago to continue to support that, a user side subsidy to help reduce the cost of transportation services to the user, and then to start work on what's called a one call, one click service, which really will probably start out as more of just improving information to riders. At this point, we see that the true one call, one click would involve like a call center and some of that stuff, which would probably be better handled by a coordinating entity once that's developed. but we certainly have a lot of work to do to get to that point. And so these initial funds would be used for that. What we're looking for tonight is approval to enter into a funding agreement with Contra Costa County to obtain these funds so that we can start doing this really important work. I certainly want to give an opportunity to my partner in crime, John Cunningham from the county, to give any information, as well as our amazing board members who also sit on the Accessible Transportation Task Force, Commissioner Mitchoff, who's the chair, Commissioner Geringer, who's the vice chair, Commissioner Haskew, who is also on the task force, as well as Commissioner Hudson, who I believe has left the call, but I wanted to give them an opportunity to comment as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Luella, do you have comments?
Even as this afternoon, as a part of the working crew to handle some of the preliminary work so that we can present to the task force, it is really clear that it's important that we get some force of funding source this early, because we've got to kickstart something that's been kind of on hold for a very long time. And to have a source of funds will really impel the members and strengthen them to accomplish our goal.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to serve on the Accessible Transportation Task Force, but the people that you are hearing, Luella and Teresa, I know others aren't on here, but I really want to thank both Peter and John. They're the driving force behind this. They're the visionaries and the creative force that have brought this plan to us. It's pretty easy to accept everything they bring. We don't rubber stamp. I want the public to know that. But I do want to give so much credit to Peter and John and Peter. One comes before the other and the other, but they work very well together. And this is going to be such a wonderful thing, not only for our seniors, but for those in the community who have other types of challenges. And that can include me in the near future. And I'm not going to put that on any of you, but you never know. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other commissioners?
And at the appropriate time, I would like to make the motion to move forward on this.
Okay. Are there any other commissioners who have something to add? Any members of the public, would you like to speak on this item? If so, please raise your hand. No, I don't see any. Terry, and do you?
No hands raised.
No, and I'd like to, John Cunningham, would you care to say a couple of words?
I didn't have anything to add. Thank you, Chair Kelly. John Cunningham with Contra Costa County. I didn't have anything to add to what Peter said. I appreciate the support of this board and moving ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll bring this back. And now who wanted to make the motion? Karen, yes.
I move the item. And again, not only are they great staff, but they're very humble. And I mean that sincerely. They really are. So I move the item.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay.
All right. And Mitchoff moves the item. And I'm going to give it to Haskew to second, if you don't mind, Federal.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Then Terry Ann, could we have the roll on this one, please?
Yes. Commissioner Arnerich,
Yes.
Commissioner Butt,
Yes.
Commissioner Geringer,
Yes.
Commissioner Haskew,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak,
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Vice Chair Glover,
Yes.
Chair Kelly.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Hudson and Thorpe absent.
Thank you.
And
Karen,
Chair
you wanted
Kelly?
to say something?
Yes, I neglected to include in our partners in crime, my colleague Supervisor Glover. He supported my motion to include this money as funding from Measure X. So he is also part of our cadre of folks who are doing this. So I want to thank Federal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So moving along, correspondence. There's a joint letter to Caltrans from the congestion management agencies and MTC regarding the transit bus on shoulder pilot program guidelines. You've seen that. Some committee reports from our RTPCs. And then we're on to authority board and staff comments. I don't have any particular comments tonight, but I'd like to know if any commissioners do. So if so, now is your time. Please raise your hand. Any comments? No, I don't see any. So then I'm going to go to Tim Hale, our executive director. Tim?
Thank you, Chair Kelly. Just a few comments this morning or this evening. We just finalized implementing our flexible worksite policy. So this past Monday was our first all staff meeting. We were all here in person in the office for the very first time over the last couple of years. So that was really exciting. And so we're seeing a lot more faces here at the office, and people are kind of coming and going about 1 to 2 days per week right now as we kind of transition back to the office. Also just wanted to report out that the authority board, we decided to send a letter to the city of Concord about Gomentum Station, as well as some of the concerns around the development at the Concord Weapons Station. And so we had some follow up on that. I met with Councilmember Obringer and Councilmember McGallion, as well as city staff, to talk about what may or may not be in the draft term sheet for the new development. And so happy to report out that they are going to be including our request from our letter in the term sheet. So that was a really good meeting, productive meeting. In terms of just public outreach, we are, I think we sent an email out a few weeks ago, but we are reaching out into your communities right now to get feedback on the countywide transportation plan. So you may have heard or seen some of the CTP pop-ups, as well as Lindsay Willis and John Hong are also planning some more in-depth CTP workshops for each of the subregions. So more to come on that. And then on Friday, thanks for the great work of Stephanie Hu and Ivan Ramirez and the team. We were able to really put the McCollum Bridge pedestrian overcrossing under construction. And so Friday, we're going to be celebrating that with our first in-person groundbreaking event from the pandemic. And so I know we sent out an invite to you, and I know some of you are planning on attending. And then lastly, the planning for the Redefined Mobility Summit is in full force. And we have almost a complete program. We have 4 total panels. One is about the roadways of the future. Another panel is going to be about advancing automation. Another one's going to be about workforce development. And then another one is really partnering with the county and the great work they're doing around regional air mobility and drones. And AAA is really hosting the demo zone, and we're going to have also Bay Area Leads, the partner that we use and work with for the many STEM events we have throughout the year. They are working and partnering with us to bring students and teachers into the event to be able to demonstrate their STEM programs that we help support across the county. So going to be a really exciting event. It's on April 5th. Hopefully have it on your calendar, and looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And I look forward to attending that, and also the McCollum Bridge opening on this coming Friday. So if there are no other comments, then the calendar and event schedule is in your packet. And we will now adjourn the meeting until, I see Mark Foley wants to say something. We'll let him speak. Mark?
Thank you, Chair Kelly. I apologize. I was waiting for the ex officios. I just wanted to give you a brief update regarding BART and redistricting. BART actually adopted our redistricting maps last week, so we've concluded the process, and I'm happy to report that the city of Clayton will remain in District 1. That's currently Director Allen's district, and they will not be moving into District 2, the Eastern Contra Costa district that I represent, which made sense based on the travel patterns. And unrelated to redistricting, as some of you may be aware, BART staff confirmed last week that one of our directors, Latifah Simon, had moved outside of her district. And because of that relocation, by law, she had vacated that seat. So Bart is now going through the process of not only trying to understand what happened and why it happened, but also the process of appointing a replacement so that the clock is ticking, if you will. We have 60 days to appoint someone to fill that vacancy, and then ultimately the voters will decide on a permanent successor for that seat. So that's what I have from Bart.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that update, Mark. So if there are no other comments, any other ex officio comments? Seeing none. Okay, so then we will adjourn this meeting until our next. Tom, did you want to say something? No, you're just waving your hand. All right. Goodbye. We will see you at our next meeting on April 20th. Thank you, everyone.